needn't have any reward. Your virtue is what is dearest to you. There are others who are drawn downward. Their devils pull on them, draw them down. The more they sink, the more fervently glow their eyes, and their lust for their God. Their lust for God gets brighter and burns hotter as they get closer to hell. Alas, their clamor too has reached your ears, you who are virtuous. Quote, "What I am not, that to me are God and virtue." End quote. That's their clamor. They say everything that is not me is God. Now, let's pause on that thought for a second. That is stark evidence of Plato being involved, right? That here's the regular old earth, the shadowy reflection of the perfect forms, and in heaven there is the Platonic heaven of things that are all perfect, and there's only one of each, and so on. And all the shadowy instantiations are on earth. Therefore, if you look at it that way, then anything that's up there is really an opposite kind of thing from what's down here. And it was really written right into the fabric of that Platonic sort of thinking to end up saying that man is base and evil and immoral. The Greeks never thought that. Before Plato gave his thing, and then it was equivocated into Christianity, before that, you could believe that the gods were somehow supernatural, and man was somehow more natural. The Greeks believed, for example, the gods never die, but man does. But beyond that, they didn't think there was a lot of difference between men and gods. They couldn't imagine anything other than a man for a god. And therefore their gods had quarrels, and they slept around, and they fought, and they overthrew each other, and quarreled more and fought more. So it's a different idea of religion. The religion of Christianity is an equivocation from Plato's thinking and about the world of forms and a higher, more pure reality. And this is a dank, deep, nasty reality that's vague and stuff. These people, when they say, "What I am not," everything up in heaven, to me that is God and virtue. And Nietzsche wants to repudiate that and say, we can have part in God, we can have part in virtue. There are others who come along, heavy and creaking like carts carrying stones downhill. Now keep that in mind, a cart that's going downhill with stones. They talk much of dignity and virtue. They call their brake virtue. So imagine the cart going downhill. What is a good thing to you in that situation? If that's what you are, is trying to keep yourself from speeding downhill and wrecking and careening and destroying the cart, you've got to slow it down. And if that's what you are, like a man destined for hell, and the only thing that you can use are brakes to slow you down on your descent into hell because of original sin, and there's no way you can get away from your original sin, you're like a cart going downhill towards hell, and you need brakes. So virtue is what slows you down. Is that how, that's how religious people look at virtue. There are others who are like cheap clocks. Now this is silly, but it's a thought. They're like cheap clocks that must be wound up. They tick, and they want the tick-tock to be called virtue. So, okay, take that as it may. Verily I have my pleasure in these. Whenever I find such clocks, I shall wind and wind them with my mockery, and they shall whir for me. That is silly. Okay, we skip the next paragraph. With their virtue they want to scratch out the eyes of their enemies, and they exalt themselves only to humble others. So the reason a priest, for example, would exalt himself is to make others be more humble. And then again there are such as sit in their swamp and speak thus out of the reeds. Sitting in their swamp they say, "Virtue, that is sitting still in a swamp. We bite no one, and we avoid those who want to bite, and in all things we hold the opinion that is given to us." Is that virtue, to just hold the opinion given you and sit quiet in your swamp? And then again there are such as love gestures, and think that virtue is some kind of gesture. Their knees always adore, and their hands are hymns to virtue, but their heart knows nothing about it. I think their knees always adore means they're always kneeling, and they're always praying like this. But as for virtue itself, their heart doesn't know anything about virtue. And then again, there are such as consider it virtue to say, virtue is necessary. But at bottom they believe only that the police is necessary. Now, I might say guilty, sort of, but I don't believe only the police is necessary. We have to have virtue, and then the police have to come and arrest people that aren't towing the line, as it were, that are stepping over the line by violating other people's rights. So we have to have virtue and the police, but the police is necessary, I say that. Some who cannot see what is high in man call it virtue, that they see all too closely what is low in man. So some who, like a guy who works in soup kitchens and he brags about it, he's proud of it, he can't appreciate Donald Trump and Bill Gates, but he sees homeless, helpless drug addicts every day, and he thinks that he's got a head up on you for virtue in that. Thus they call their evil eye virtue. That makes your eye evil if you can't see what's good. Some want to be edified and elevated, and they call that virtue, a desire to be elevated, while others want to be bowled over, and they call that their virtue. And thus almost all believe that they have a share in virtue, and at the very least everyone wants to be an expert on good and evil. At the very least, absolute minimum is that everyone's an expert on good and evil. Yet Zarathustra did not come to say to all these liars and fools, "What do you know of virtue? What could you know of virtue?" That's not what Zarathustra came to say. Rather, that you, my friends, might grow wary of the old words you have learned from the fools and the liars. Wary of the words reward, retribution, punishment, revenge. Wary of saying what makes an act good is that it is unselfish. Now, we hear a lot, don't we, that Ayn Rand is just a Nietzschean. Nietzsche said stuff that Ayn Rand's just tagging along with. Now, he says you should be wary of people who say the unselfish acts are good. Be wary of these. Now, this implies maybe that a selfish act is good. So he's saying that selfish acts may be good, but from what he said earlier, a selfish act could include something that he sacrifices himself to and his neighbor. So remember, he said that much, that he's going to sacrifice other people to him. Now, Ayn Rand took the sacrifice out. She said no one will sacrifice to anyone. So Nietzsche, when he said selfish, he didn't mean anything by it. It's just a floating abstraction. When Ayn Rand says selfish, she means long-term, rational, with respect to others' rights, which is the only reasonable thing there is to do. So there is possibly a passage that would be taken to indicate a tie-in with Ayn Rand, but it's not. It's only a superficial way of looking at her ideas. Nietzsche's ideas can be superficially messed with, but Ayn Rand's are integrated, and you can't refer to one part of the philosophy without another. Nietzsche's just eclectic and bizarre. Oh, my friends, that yourself be in your deed, as the mother is in her child. Let that be your word concerning virtue. That the self be in your deed, as the mother is in her child. Now, he's deliberately worded that bizarrely. We would think as the child is in her mother and there will be a birth. But in what way, don't mean to get too Professor Antonish here, in what way is the mother inside of her child? Well, Nietzsche didn't have this to say, but we could say DNA is, psst, psst, be quiet.